League of Legends and Pokémon, the two most iconic titles in modern gaming, yet no one's ever tried merging both universes. So what if we did? Hello everyone, I'm Snowball, and today I'm going to take the typing system in Pokemon and apply it to every champion in League of Legends. I'm a huge nerd regarding both of these games, and I think it'd be really fun merging them considering they've been a big part of my life.
Beautiful, baby, beautiful! Yeah!
Of course, this video is just my opinion, so if you disagree with anything throughout your precious watch time, let me know what you change in the comments. I've decided to format these videos by each role, so naturally I'll go in the order of top, jungle, mid, ADC, and support, which happens to be the order of the roles from the hardest to the easiest. Finally, I'd like to preface that some champions in League don't really perfectly fit any of the current existing Pokemon types, but those happen to be the most fun to think about. Starting off with the Island of Summoner's Rift, the top lane section of this video deserves to be pioneered by Ornn, an icon of the role. Seeing as he has a blacksmith design, it's a no-brainer to me that he is part steel type. Along with his fire breathing, fire steel type seems like the best fit to me. Hopefully with our first example, you all understand what kind of criteria I'll be applying to the champions when it comes to finding what type fits best with them. Enjoy! Alawi should be ghost water type. I figure because she has the tentacle powers of that hentai ghost demon, it makes perfect sense. I think Renekton and Nasus would both be ground dark type. I could also see the argument that they should just be solid ground type, but considering their themes and powers, adding dark type makes the most sense to me. Speaking of dark type, it's time to discuss Aatrox. Most likely throughout these videos, you will find that I slap dark type on all the Darkins and it just fits. I really want to give Aatrox a secondary typing, and I think that flying type fills that void. When he ults, he flies around and stuff. I also wanted to add in that Aatrox reminds me a lot of Hydreigon. Let's fill in the rest of the void of top lane. And look at Cho'Gath. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't give Cho'Gath dragon type. A nice, thick, pure dragon type. You know what? Let's just streak through a bunch of top laners that I think would be purely one type. Camille and Pantheon, easily steel type. I can't think of what other types they could represent. I could see an argument for dragon type on Pantheon, but I feel like that's a reach. Dr. Mundo, hear me out, electric type. I know at first glance it sounds kind of weird, but he does have those electric rods in his body and stuff, and I can't really think of anything else to give him. Gangplank would be a fire type. His barrel bombs, along with his gun and his ultimate, all push this fire type image onto me. If you ask me though, a pirate Pokemon would have been a perfect fit for what Quaxly could have been. How is Pokemon still dropping the ball in Gen 9, man? The way I see it, Gwen is a pure ghost type. To be honest, I can see her also being potentially steel type because of her big pair of scissors, but considering like 60% of the champions have metal weapons, giving them all steel type would be boring. Going on to our second pure electric type, this one couldn't have been more obvious, but Kennen claims the throne. Marking our first normal type, I'm handing it to Poppy. To be honest, I feel like a lot of the Demacian champions give me normal type vibes. However, if any of you want to make Poppy the perfect candidate to be the league's very own Tickaton, I wouldn't blame you. For the most part, the criteria for being a flying type will have a very low bar. Wings equals flying, so Quinn gets the crown for our first pure flying type. And let's be honest, Set is fighting type and nothing else. Shen is one of those characters for me that I have to take longer to think about, but him being a pure psychic type just sounds really cool and fits the theme to me. Speaking of fitting themes, we're kidding ourselves if we didn't expect Singe to be a pure poison type. Lastly, for our one type top laners, a champion you guys must have never expected to be here.
Rock solid.
Let's pair these two champions because in my opinion, they'd be the same typing. Fiora and Garen are normal steel type. I don't know why, but like I said earlier, Demacians are just normal tier. All this talk about Demacia is making me feel noxious. Get it? Because okay, so for Darius, I actually think he'd be a great poison type. Like, he doesn't use poison in the traditional sense, but he has his bleed, you know, which does ticking damage. However, I'll also add the dark type as well because he has kind of an edgy vibe to him. Let's cover the remaining Noxian top laners now, since I don't have the confidence to make another cringe joke. Sion should 100% have the fire type. He has literally an active oven inside of his stomach. Also want to give him the dark type because he's kind of scary. But I could also justify him being given the ground type. All of his attacks revolve around the ground, so I don't think it's a reach. Rounding them up, we have the most played champion in the top lane. Kled is another special case. At first, I wasn't sure what type to assign him, but I realized that Skarl is literally a perfect reason to slap dragon type on him, along with the fighting type, because he's always ready for the smoke. Because of how much talking about Kled inspired me, I'll group the rest of the Yordle top laners right now. Starting off with Rumble, I think a fire electric type would be very fitting. All of his abilities make this pretty self-explanatory. With Gnar, we can kind of go crazy. He's from the Freljord and was frozen in ice, so we could make him an ice type, but I think he should totally be a dragon type. His Meganar form is way too Chad to not be. I also think that he could be a rock type since he likes to throw massive boulders, so I'll slap Dragon Rock on Gnar. I know a lot of you were waiting for this little guy. It's time to cover the Demon King of top lane. Teemo is obviously going to be a poison type. He literally places Amoonguses as his ultimates. I think considering his invisibility and how it's enhanced in bushes, he should also be a part grass type, meaning he's actually the first grass type in this video. He's literally among us. Next, I have 4 champions in mind to talk about simultaneously because they all share 2 traits in my eyes. Jax, Aurelia, Jace, and Riven. Now you may ask, Snowball, what is it that these 4 characters have in common? Well, I was getting to it. Just kidding. They're all broken. All 4 of them are disgusting demigods in their own rights, but in relation to this video, in my mind, they'd also all be fighting type. Jax would be fighting dark. You must simply accept this answer as factual. Aurelia's fighting psychic. Since she can manipulate her blades to fly around and shit, a little Metacham cosplay, you know? Jace would be fighting electric. I just feel like his abilities all revolve around him beating people up while powering himself up with electric pulses or whatever that is. I watched Arcane, I know what I'm talking about. And Riven would be fighting steel type. One of the exceptions to the she has a sword so she has a steel type rule I made up earlier. Since we just spoke about the most broken top laners, let's switch it up to a more humble champion in Kale. She's pretty flexible in terms of trying to fit her in the Pokemon universe. I'll list what types I think she could be, then what I would stick onto her. Based on her abilities, I could see an argument for her being electric or fire type. Also, pure normal type doesn't seem unreasonable. I think the combination would be fairy flying type. The flying aspect is obvious, but I really just wanted an excuse to assign the fairy type to someone already. I'd like to mirror Kale with Morgana, but because she's in a future video, we'll settle with the male version of her in the top lane, Mordekaiser. Being a revenant of the underworld and all, I'm gonna just give him dark and ghost type and leave it at that. If anyone disagrees, you can take it up with him. While we already covered the quadfecta of broken top laners, there's still one more that's astronomically unfair to use. Cassante is just, he's like the Mega Garchomp of League. He's so bulky but does 1 million damage per auto. I think ground type would fit him a lot since he literally has an attack that knocks people up from smashing the ground, and fighting type because he has some nutty melee combats. Damn, I just realized fighting types are broken top lane. It's time to unbench the Kench, and he's totally a ghost water type. It just makes perfect sense. He's a little fish and he's a demon. He's basically if Jellicent and Wishcash had a deviant child. Let's stay on the ugly train for a moment because we have another passenger in the form of a smelly, sticky, Zon inhabiting spider. While Urgot isn't a bug in the traditional sense, his spider-like lower body makes it way too tempting not to use this opportunity to have our first bug type of the series. Also, making him a dual type paired with poison makes sense too since he has those gross sticky bombs. We're left with 5 champions in this role and 4 of them happen to be from the Freljord, so let's group him to save some time. Starting off with Gragas, I know that he has true ice or something like that, but I personally don't really see him having ice type being very fitting. I think he's definitely more of a water type, along with the secondary typing of normal. I thought of his body slam and he just reminds me too much of Snorlax to not make him a normal type. Capping off our final normal type of the top lane, Tryndamere just doesn't really scream, get it, scream, anything else to me. Besides that and Steel, since his whole kit is based around him using his sword. Come to think of it, does every male champion from the Freljord scream? Anyways, Olaf has multiple options as to what types to give him. He can be ice type because he's from the Freljord and his axes slow you. He can be steel type because of the axes. He can be fire type because of his ult turning him all red and angry. He can also be electric type because of his E. He can even be fighting type because of his melee combat style. I think for the fun of it, I'll make him ice fire type because I probably won't have another opportunity to have that combination. Rounding out our snowy boys, Volibear is last but definitely not least. Just kidding, he's like the worst champion in the game as of right now and is 100% an ice electric type. Is there any explaining necessary? Finally, our last champion to cover for the top lane, I thought it would be fitting to end off the list with Yorick, since alphabetically he's last as well. Yorick is from the Shadow Isles, so he's a great candidate to be a ghost type, and because he's a gravedigger and can summon walls from the ground, his secondary typing being ground makes so much sense. So Yorick is a ghost ground type. With that, we have finished up top lane and can move on to the most Chad role in League, jungle. Starting us off, I want to cover Nunu and Willump, since they're my main champ. I think giving them ice type is fairly obvious, but I also want to give them fairy type. While I imagine psychic can work as well, this combo fits the best in my eyes. Also, quick shameless plug, I stream on Twitch every day and I'm trying to hit Twitch partner before TwitchCon. I'd really appreciate anyone coming to check me out or support me. Considering Nunu's annoying playstyle that everyone hates having to face, I'll go ahead and list some more champions of the same fun nature. Shaco being one of the most gimmicky champions in League, I think it's fitting to assign him the most gimmicky Pokemon type. Psychic type feels right. Along with him being able to clone himself, it makes sense. Considering that he's also a spirit, I think, I'm giving him ghost type as well. Rengar is a personal hatred of mine. People swear this champion's weak. Anyways, before I get tilted, I'm gonna give Rengar grass type. Bushes are an advantageous terrain for him, and I can't see anything else fitting. Fiddlesticks is so annoying to play against. It's just a trend that these champions are only good at punishing mistakes. In my mind, Fiddlesticks is a ghost dark type. He's literally the demon of fear. I think I speak for all League players when putting Kayn in this category. The most unpunished champion in the entire game. His aesthetic, along with him being a darken, means he's a dark type. Jarvan is so a rock fighting type. His intense melee combat along with his ult, this is too valid. Master Yi can be a psychic type. His meditation is what gives me that vibe. Along with normal type because he's kind of just a bloke, chillin'. We can explore Ionia real quick to see what other junglers to choose from. Lee Sin is obviously a fighting type. You could probably get creative and give him maybe psychic or even dragon type, but I'll keep him pure. I like Ivern, he's a chill guy. He's grass type, but I also want to give him fairy type. I don't think he'd mind. Ah yes, the low punny of League of Legends. Lilia is gonna double down with the grass fairy type as well. Fight me in the comments, ICBA. Rounding out our Ionian junglers, Wukong would probably be a fighting type. He could be normal too. He doesn't identify super well with any of the typings. I guess a lot of junglers are fighting types. Speaking of not identifying with any type, let's cover Zac. I used him as an example of this in the intro of the video. He would just be a water type, right?
My goo.
Right? I've already said how Shaco and Fiddlesticks are ghost type, but looking at the remaining champions, there are actually so many of them in this role. I don't know how I'll get through these without making it boring.
Speed round.
Hecarim, Karthus, and Viego are pure ghost type. Kindred and Nocturne are ghost dark type. And Maokai is a ghost grass type. Finally, we're done all the edgy junk. Elise would be dark bug type. Evelyn would be dark fairy type. And Diana would be dark steel type. Now we're done the edgy ones. Udyr is a tricky one. He has multiple elements to his kit that can make him many types. But I think a way to work around it is if we just made him normal type. Kha'Zix would be a bug flying type. He looks like he's based off a praying mantis. And he can also flutter his wings to fly briefly, so it makes total sense. Rek'Sai would be a pure ground type. She digs tunnels, so that's what led me to this. And Bel'Veth would be dragon type, which caps off our Voidling junglers. Speaking of dragon types, I'll give you 3 seconds to guess who I'm about to name drop. Yup, Shyvana. And she would obviously be a dragon fire type. Yes, you should feel bad if you couldn't guess it. Anyone ever played TFT? Because we're about to run some double ups. Xin Zhao and Vi would be steel fighting type, and Sejuani and Trundle would be pure ice type. Skarner is really cool. He'd be a poison rock type. I think Echo would be an electric type. The animations to his abilities justify this choice in my opinion. Otherwise, maybe steel? Graves gives me pure fire type vibes. His heavy arsenal goes crazy. I have no idea what else you could assign him. Entering our final 3 junglers, I think Nidalee would be pure grass type. I sat and contemplated for a while about what typing I thought I could give Warwick. The liquid coursing through his body made me want to say poison, but it doesn't act as a poison. I think just purely based on his aesthetic, I'm giving him dark type. Finally, our last jungler, who happened to be the first champion I ever played. Okay, moving on to mid lane, the role of all time. I know earlier I mentioned that this wasn't all going to be one video, but mid-production, I've decided to do just that, because I'm lazy. And because I'm lazy, I'm going to try to go by these champions alphabetically. Beginning the mid-champs with Ahri, I think she'd be a psychic fire type. Her Q and W are where I get the flamey vibes, and her E is basically mind control, which reminds me of a certain Pokemon. Akali would be a fighting type. She'd be flipping and kicking shit. Also, I think she'd be a dark type, because assassin champs have that aesthetic. Akshan is another champion that I don't think would fit any type, so I'm just going to give him normal type. Next up, one of my favorites, Anivia. Obviously, she's a flying ice type. I think Annie is another obvious choice, being fire type. I think you could also give her psychic or dark type as well. I'm just going to leave her with one though. For the sake of things, I'm just going to give Aurelion Sol dragon type. You can probably argue any secondary typing could work with him, but like I said, I'm a bit lazy. Shurima shuffling his way in, Azir would be ground type. Wow, big surprise, right? I also think it would be cool to make him a ghost type, because he's summoning soldiers to fight for him. Speaking of ground types, Cass fits into that well, along with being poison type. Speaking of her, let me know in the comments what your favorite snake Pokemon is. Mine is Seviper. For our first Yordle in mid lane, Corki would be a flying fire type. For our second Yordle, wait, is Fizz a Yordle? He's an Atlantean or something, right? Well, he'd be a water type. Galio would be a flying rock type. He probably has the strongest wings in the Runeterra, being able to carry that hunk of a bod. These next three characters happen to be the same type in my opinion, so I'm just gonna lump them together. Kassadin, Katarina, and LeBlanc should all be dark type, except LeBlanc should be secondary psychic type as well. Lissandra would be an ice ghost type. Her passive steals the souls of her victims and turns them into ice bombs, so I think this typing fits her well. What the? What is that? Lux would be an electric fire type. Her abilities both have the sharpness of lightning but the power of fire, so it makes total sense to me. Also, does anyone feel like Lux deserves a new skin? Malzahar would be a poison psychic type. His abilities, along with the whole space herpes thing, fits those types so good. I think Nico would be a grass psychic type. She seems very connected with nature, and her clones make me feel like she could be psychic, just like Shaco. Now we have the opposite of that, Oriana. She would be steel electric type. Kiana is like Udyr. She has multiple elements in her kit that would easily slot her in one of the typings, but since there are more than two, let's just make her normal type. Rise would be a psychic type. You could probably also give him a secondary typing of electric or fire though. I'm having trouble establishing what type I think Silas would be. His chains are a huge part of his kit and lore, so I think steel type makes sense, but he also has magical powers and can copy other champions' abilities, so I think psychic steel type is the most accurate. I'm actually realizing a lot of mid laners happen to be solid candidates for the psychic typing. Don't blame me though, this isn't me being lazy. I'm actually being as creative as I can. But Syndra's a psychic type. Okay, watch. Talia could be a psychic type too, but I'm not going to do that. She will be a rock ground type. Yup. Like I said earlier, assassin champions have that dark type aesthetic. So Talon and Zed are dark type. However, Zed would be ghost type too. I think just like Kiana and Udyr, Twisted Fate would be a normal type. Veigar would be a dark type, while Vex would be a dark and ghost type. Oh my gosh, it's Victor from Arcane! Ah! Victor would be an electric fire type. In my opinion, Vladimir is a dark water type. I was having so much trouble thinking of what to give him. Nothing really applies to him, but I figured along with his aesthetic and his liquidy abilities, this is where he lands. Yasuo and Yone would both be steel type. However, Yasuo would be flying type and Yone would be ghost type. While Yasuo doesn't actually fly, his powers are based on wind. While Yone can leave his physical form and enter the spirit realm or whatever that is. We only have 3 more champions in mid lane and I'll just group them together considering I think they'd all be fire type. While Xerath would be electric fire type, Ziggs would just be pure fire type. Then finally, Zoe would be fire fairy type. Alright, well, I guess we had to cover ADCs eventually. Dude, I hate ADC players more than I hate critical hits in a Nuzlocke.
I can do one more rapid spin. I can do one more rapid spin. No!
Starting us off with the most racist champions in the game, Draven would be a steel type. He has no attributes to look towards for inspiration besides his axes. Vayne, in my opinion, is a dark type. Tristana, with all of her explosive attacks, scream fire type to me. I think Zeri, Ezreal, and Lucian would be electric type. All of their attacks make this pretty obvious to me. However, because of his lore, I think Lucian will also be a ghost type. The most no-brainer candidate for flying type would be Xayah, but I think Kai'Sa would be that as well, along with fire type. We can round out our Voidling ADCs with Kog'Maw, who's a poison type. Speaking of poison types, Twitch falls in this category too. Hi! Now, if I made this video a while back, we would have never had a water type ADC. Thank God Nyla exists now. Also, I guess in the same realm, there's Miss Fortune, who would be a fire type, of course. In the same way as Gangplank, her abilities give off a fiery fury. Just like Draven, Caitlyn would be a steel type. However, Jinx would be a fire electric type. I could have lumped her in with the other electric type champions earlier, but I wanted her to be with Caitlyn. I think while being a contender for many typings, Aphelios would be a ghost normal type. The ghost type coming from his sister and the normal type being him. Kalista would be a pure ghost type. I think it makes sense to give Sivir the ground typing along with steel. Her weapon is an ancient Shuriman weapon, so it fits her well. Coming in as our 4th last spot is Jhin. He's a psycho, so giving him dark type makes sense. Along with the fire typing because of 4! Samira would definitely be a fighting type. Like I said earlier in the video, all Darkins are dark type, so Varus falls into that as well. Ending off the marksman champions, the OG Ashe, a pure ice type. And starting off our supports, our only ice type in this role, Braum. Moving on, here are the fire types to balance things out. Heimerdinger at this point feels like a wildcard champion role-wise, but I feel like he's mostly a gimmick support right now, so he's here. A fire electric type. Leona is the poster girl of fire types, along with being steel type, while Brand is the poster boy of fire types. Finally, I think Vel'Koz would be fire type, along with electric type, because that's what his abilities remind me of. Amumu is a ground ghost type. I don't care what happens to me, I'd still hug him.
Let me give you a hug.
Remember earlier when I talked about Kayle? Well, it's time for her sister Morgana, who would be a ghost dark type. I actually considered making her an ice type because of her Q, because that thing lasts forever. Alistar is a ground normal type. He wasn't safe from the normal type Demacian rule. I think Rakan would be a flying fighting type. Janna would also be a flying type, along with psychic. Actually, there's a lot of psychic types. Let's go through all of them. Karma would be pure psychic type. Bard and Zillion as well. Nami's a water psychic type. Seraphine, Sona, and Soraka would also all be psychic type. However, Seraphine is part normal. Thresh and Senna would both be ghost type. However, Senna is a dark type too. Completing the aquatic trio, Pike and Nautilus would both be water ghost type. Rounding out our hook supports, Blitzcrank is an electric steel type. Rel and Tarek would both be pure rock type. Lulu and Lulu. And Yumi would be fairy type. We're down to our final 3 champs of the video. Renata is a pure poison type. I consider Swain a support right now, and he'd be a dark type. And lastly, I felt it was fitting to end off the champs with the last support alphabetically. Zyra would be a pure grass type. Thank you so much for watching my video. It's my first time making one like this. I hope you all enjoyed. If you want to see more of my content, you should check out my Twitch. See you next time.